freight efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.
Here in episode 133, we have joining us Tom Lincoln. He's National Sales and Service Manager at Dana, where he talks about Dana's claim to fame, Dana's place in the marketplace today, and the company's Fleet Council. He also talks about what he is learning from fleets, the downspeeding trend, how he looks at the future while dealing with the here and now, and what's going on with maintenance and uptime, and how to handle the complexity of our market. Today we have joining us Tom Lincoln. He's National Sales and Service Manager with Dana. Hello, Tom. Thanks for joining me today. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it as well.
I always have to ask, and we have to figure out how we became friends, because that's a pretty strong requirement for being a guest. So do you remember how we met, or and then just kind of got along?
If I'm remembering correctly, I think we met for the first time at a Dana Fleet Council event in Austin, and I think it was maybe 2018.
Yeah, it was before the pandemic.
You obviously were pretty close with our product planning lead at the time, and he had invited you down to kind of give some insights into downspeeding and kind of general fuel efficiency trends in the industry. So I know that was the first time we met, and then since then we've crossed paths at a bunch of industry events, TMC, at some additional Dana Fleet Council events as well. So
Dana Fleet Council. So that's and well, why don't you just explain that a minute, and then I'll tell the audience what I'm about to say.
Yeah. So we don't do it every year. The pandemic kind of threw us off our rhythm a little bit, but we're getting back into a kind of an annual cycle for these fleet councils, and they go by other names in the industry, but we call them fleet council. So it's an opportunity where we can bring end customers together and kind of create an environment where not only are we able to share kind of best practices and insights into industry trends from our perspective, and have folks like you from NACFE join us to give kind of impartial third party perspective, but it also gives us an opportunity to collect feedback directly from fleets, the challenges they face, where they see their needs heading, how we're as a supplier supporting them, and how we can do better in supporting their mission. So it's really a great forum for Dana's broader business. My team, we interact with fleets and dealers, day in, day out. But when you think about product planning and engineering and
Right.
senior leadership, it's really a great opportunity for the broader Dana business to get directly engaged with fleets that are running our technology and kind of help guide our product roadmap and our overall go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, I think these are great. I mean, I gotta believe, and I did a few of these, or led a few of these when I was at International Truck with work truck, and then over the road customer focus groups or fleet councils or that kind of thing, and they kind of come in three flavors. I mean, I'm guessing you've done a couple of these maybe, but one is it's just the sort of the supplier or the manufacturer's field service and sales groups, a little product planning with fleets, and that's it. So it becomes a bit of a it's valuable, and these things are expensive. I mean, sometimes you're flying customers in, or you're renting and organizing a resort at a minimum for the meetings, food and beverage and all that. So one is sort of that, like, Dana with your customers, and then sort of the next level is kind of where maybe you bring in some thought leadership and third party folks and so forth. And what I like about those is that in NACFE we love these. So if anybody's listening and want to do one of these, we'd be up for doing it with y'all. But what happens there is that the fleets quickly go, well, wait a minute, this isn't just Dana trying to sell me something, or Dana trying to sell me on their product strategy or their future, but they're helping bring in other folks that can help add content and so forth. And what I witnessed, Tom, there is that the fleets then become much more open, and they talk amongst themselves more. And one fleet will talk to the other while one of your folks or yourself or me stand around at a cocktail hour or something. And so it all just becomes much more more about our challenges, our opportunities, what we're thinking about, and so forth. And then the final one is, we've done a few of these. I'm not sure we've done it with you guys, but where NACFE actually takes a bigger role in facilitating some of the sessions, and even to the point where I've had a couple, Tom, where there were in your case, there'd be no Dana people in the room at all. That maybe I or NACFE's facilitated a conversation with the fleets, and of course they're going to get much more open with with me or somebody independent, third party than you in the room, because you're going to end up negotiating price and timing and availability and all kinds of things, you know. So those have been like unbelievably powerful, and to the extent that once the manufacturers folks came in the room, I did this early on with Nikola and a few others. Once they came in the room, then the fleets just decided, all right, what the hell, you know, I'll say, oh no, sometimes they'll say, well, wait a minute, I said that. Here's what I really meant. So anyway, they're just cool. And I just wanted to thank Dana, because you guys have done these really well. And many on the audience know I lost my wife to cancer in December of 2024. And actually, the last of probably 100 events that Letty joined me on was your event outside of Mobile, Alabama, along the Mobile Bay. And Tom, she loved that event. The nighttime golf we played, and then at dinners, and even some of the sessions and breakfast, she was with the fleets with some of your team. And thanks for making her feel comfortable. And I'll never forget that being her last industry event.
No, we were very shocked and saddened to hear of her loss. I mean, having the opportunity to spend that week with you and Letty, and having you guys be a part of it was fantastic. And myself and the team, we're very sorry for the loss, but so happy again.
Thank you. I appreciate that quite a lot, Tom. All right, so tell us a little bit about Dana and yourself. I mean, it's a 100-year-old company, right? And tell us a little bit about it, you, and where Dana is sort of right now in the marketplace.
Personally, I've been in the industry now for 25 years. I started my career actually in the shop turning a wrench. Pretty technical person. I spent about 2 years turning a wrench, and then I got an opportunity to go to work for a chassis OEM, kind of doing diagnostic support for technicians. So I kind of grew up on the service side, but I've always been in kind of customer and fleet facing roles on the service and the sales side of the business. So as you mentioned today, I manage Dana's field sales and service team in the U.S. and Canada. So I've been here in this role now for about 14 years, and just really enjoy the team that I get to work with each day, and the support that we get from Dana is kind of a broader business. But speaking of Dana, you mentioned over 100 years. We actually are 127 years old this year. So yeah, so a lot of people don't realize this. Our Dana's kind of claim to fame was we invented the very first universal joint.
Yeah.
Back in 1904, one of our founders, Clarence Spicer, patented a new approach to transmitting torque from an engine to the wheels. Prior to Mr. Spicer's invention, change five and sprockets were kind of the standard. Exposed big chains and big sprockets on axles. So with Spicer's invention of that first universal joint, he and his partner Charles Dana, who our company namesake, we essentially created the modern driveline as we know it today. So we unlocked the modern drive shaft, the modern ring and pinion configuration for drive axles. If you fast forward 127 years now, we continue to lead in this space. We're one of the largest drive shaft and axle manufacturers in the world. We've got operations in every region of the globe. So, drive shafts and drive axles, drive trains is, foundational and fundamental to our DNA.
I remember, in that 2018 piece, you had just bought some electric companies and so forth. So I think Dana was leaning in pretty heavily on the early electric vehicle components days. Boy, this is kind of maybe a tough question right off the bat, but what am I right on that perspective, and kind of what maybe did you learn from that?
Yeah. So Dana did make some pretty substantial investments in battery electric, and our kind of our philosophy was to bring the competency in house. We're Dana's not only a commercial vehicle supplier, but we also do quite a bit in light vehicle space too. And when you look at the big passenger car,
Yep.
OEMs and the commercial OEMs back at that time, there was a lot of very bold predictions and announcements from our OEM customers about where their future product roadmaps were going to lead, and it was all very heavily electrified solutions. And as a legacy drivetrain and axle supplier, we're kind of standing back looking at this thinking, oh wow, if you go full e-axle and integrated electric powertrains, you probably don't need a drive shaft, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
so, all of a sudden we see our landscape shifting in front of us, and we haven't been in business for 127 years because we've just kind of sat by and waited for events to happen. We've been very active in trying to control our destiny and steer where the business goes. So as that landscape was changing, we acknowledged that we needed to be a part of that change, and so the strategy really was to to bring those competencies in house rather than forming partnerships. We went into a pretty heavy acquisition mode from high voltage power electronics to controllers to low voltage solutions to additional mechanical torque conveyance solutions that would be more applicable to electric drive systems versus conventional ice solutions. So yeah.
Say you jumped in the pool to swim, and I think that was important for a lot of us. I mean, I remember I was at International Truck from 96 to 2010, and I remember going into a meeting where it was full of electrical engineers. And I'm kind of a bit of a joker, and so I said, well, it's obvious that if you're in vehicle engineering, the electrical engineers have now won. There's a handful of mechanical engineers in the room and so forth. I remember, I don't remember the subject of the meeting, but I remember it well. And so, I think there's a lot of companies and organizations that, well, we saw this coming. We had multiplex wiring and lots of other things that emerged over the last couple of decades. But going to the concept of going to a fully battery electric van and medium duty box truck and maybe heavy truck and heavy tractor, kind of woke us all up to, hey, we need to, at a minimum, even if we end up with hybrids and highly electronic subsystems or electric subsystems and not go all the way to battery electric, we got to gain those competencies. So I got to believe that was helpful to where you are today, even if some of those sales haven't come as fast as maybe we thought. But before we get into that, so what are fleets telling you right now? And then maybe you share some things, and then I'll share what I'm hearing from fleets, and then we can figure out where we go next.
Yeah, as thinking about kind of our core business, the axle and driveline space, and because that's what we're known for, and relationships that we have with customers, longstanding relationships really stem from that. As a drivetrain supplier, most of our conversations with fleets really tend to focus on the areas where we can have the most direct impact, right? So, you mentioned technology and digital solutions, and today that's not really a space that we play in. We're a long-standing, entrenched, mechanical hard parts supplier, and because of that, our conversations really focus around those areas that we can improve. We can't necessarily solve for the labor challenges that fleets face, for example, but we can solve for things like fuel economy, and we can solve for things like unplanned downtime, which are big challenges for fleets. If you look at the volatility in energy markets and the impact that has on fleets who traditionally are not huge margin businesses, big fluctuations or big swings in cost of fuel can really impact their ability to generate margin. And
I was doing some rough calculations. I was watching the news, and they every morning they say, well, diesel's now at 5.38 a gallon nationally, and that's up $1.70. So I just sat having my coffee actually this morning and said, all right, how much 100,000 miles a year, 7 mile per gallon, class 8 truck, what's that difference? And it comes, it's like $20,000 a truck a year in fuel costs in the last month, the increase in fuel costs in the last month. And we can quickly say, well, there's fuel surcharges and rates are going to go up and they're going to price things, but we can lower our costs while we're also taking a little more revenue, or the fleets can. So but another big challenge is just kind of thrown at us. And we can get excited and almost like pay too much attention to the future and miss the current, because we've got to keep working on costs and safety and reliability and uptime, like you mentioned, and all those things with these base products, or we won't get the coffee in the morning and fish or steak at night and clothes that we want to wear. I mean, we got to take care too quickly, Tom. I think we say, well, that's the legacy part of our business. We got to plan for the future, but we certainly can't screw up the current.
yeah, I like to call it our core, right? I mean, it's you could say
Right.
legacy, or at the end of the day, it's the core. It's what keeps the lights on. It's what keeps us humming.
For you personally, then, and for your part of the business, how do you look at the future? Just to follow up the point I just made with a question, how do you handle the future and what's coming? We at NACFE believe it's an electric future, but we also think that there's opportunities here in the middle. We call it the messy middle of natural gas and biofuels and so forth, but also autonomy and connected vehicles and ADAS and all those things. So how does one, like in your work, deal with the current while working on the soon future, let me call it?
Yeah, so I mean, you asked the question a couple minutes ago about Dana's investment in 2018 through 2022, 23, and in electric drive systems, and obviously the temperature has dropped a little bit, and the market's kind of shifted a little bit under us, but we haven't necessarily changed our posture. We're still still producing and still investing and developing technologies to support that space when it when it does eventually take off. Even though I think you kind of jokingly said that the sales haven't been where we had expected or anybody really expected, so it's been a slower
Hmm.
adoption for sure. But I think when you think about that space in general, there's obviously still some challenges with, over the road and long haul, but I think there's really opportunity today where, applications that make sense. You think about like the terminal tractor space.
Right.
I think that's a space. Not only does it, check all the boxes for an ideal, kind of BEV solution from, predictable routes and, coming back to home base every night, and the packaging and the weight of a drive system are manageable. So from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. But there's also some kind of double benefit when you think about that space in terms of what are you mitigating from the headaches that that type of application creates for a conventional diesel powertrain.
I'm glad you're saying that because I think I came up with a new term yesterday. We'll see if it sticks, but I called it adverse benefits. So,
Yeah.
so like you look at like a yard tractor. I mean, typically those don't go in the warehouse, but you can now drive them in and through a warehouse because there's no real exhaust. And they're not creating emissions. They never leave the warehouse yard, and they never leave the yard. So those emissions are just kind of hanging there. We don't really see them and think about them a whole lot, but they're there. And then just drivers liking them, et cetera, et cetera. So these adverse advanced advantages or benefits that I think these companies that are now running 5, 10, 20, 100 of these yard dogs are starting to see, well, wait a minute, this helps me in this part of my business. And I hadn't thought of that benefit. So yeah, usually we're just kind of mitigating our risks and worried about how this thing's hurting our bottom line or our operations. I mean, you brought it up. I think there's a ton of these like benefits. But let's do get back to your kind of your core business. So when I think about drive lines and axles, I gotta tell you, and you tell me I'm wrong because I probably am, but there's because they've been around for 100 years, there's not a lot you can do to save fuel, right? I mean, or even get better quality and lower cost. Aren't these sort of clearly mature products? Yet I see announcing new products all the time. So what do new products and new benefits for fleets look like with your business?
Yeah. So You know, I axles today are, for the most part, inherently efficient. I mean, we can eke out a tenth of a percent here and there. But I think really at the end of the day, when you think about, like Dana as a drivetrain supplier, we really need to think about, the ecosystem that we operate in and how our components enable, the broader truck ecosystem to improve. You
Hmm.
think about, this trend in downspeeding right now where, the engine OEMs and truck OEMs are trying to drive even lower engine RPM at cruise. And in order to enable that, you need pretty low rear axle ratios to get that low engine RPM at cruise. And what does that do to our ecosystem? What does that do to a drive shaft and an axle? So I think Dana's kind of been a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to anticipating these kind of
I mean, it's, to
macro.
start with, it puts a hell of a lot of torque into it, right?
Oh, quite a bit. Yeah, if you look, I when I started with Dana 14 years ago, a pretty common on highway final drive ratio was 355.
Yeah.
And today some of the OEMs with their vertically integrated powertrains, their preferred direct drive or axle ratio is 2.16.
Yeah.
You look at what that does, it pushes torque further up the drive line, and you're almost doubling the torque now in the drive shaft that you're asking it to handle. And it creates really two problems. It's not just the critical strength. Can I put that much torque into a drive shaft and not snap yokes and U joints? But what does it do to life? Right. So the more torque you constantly ask a component to handle, the quicker it's going to wear out. So, we as a drive shaft and axle supplier, there's actually two things we got to solve for. It's not just the critical strength, but it's the life. And I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve when we launched the first generation of Vantech back in 2016. It was
Oh, 26, that's 10 years already.
10 years. So
Wow.
we launched that with a 2.26 ratio in 2016. A couple years later in 2018, we launched the S175 down to a 1.95. And when we launched those products, we had fleets and OEMs kind of scratching their heads saying, well, why are you doing that? He said, because that's where the market's headed. And we want to be ready. We want to get some experience and some miles under this platform before we actually start, seeing volume at those ratios to, we need to make tweaks, or we need to make, updates or changes to make sure we can live and, give that reliability and that durability that, fleets are going to expect from us. And, sure enough, fast forward 10 years, that 226 is actually kind of on the high side for some of these, really fast downspeed.
Is the 226 kind of area now a majority of your axles, or is it still pretty unique?
Yeah, it is definitely not the majority, but I would say it's not as unique as it was even a couple of years ago. So we're seeing more and more and more fleets that are chasing fuel economy and partnering with other OEMs to find a configuration that works, and they're starting to gravitate now to those 226, 216.
We're seeing a lot more regional all trucking where not all day cabs, but sleepers too, doing more, lower length of hauls, more state routes, more warehouses they're stopping at. They're not getting on the road and driving, doing one delivery in 2 days. They're doing 2 to 3 deliveries every day. And so with that, there's more start and stop, more hitting the docks, more this, that, and the other, which again causes, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of these challenges on duty cycles.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about like a regional haul type application. Yeah, they're not going to go to a 216 or a
Right.
226, but what we do find is a very popular ratio now for that kind of regional haul application, lower mileage. That's probably a 264 is a very common ratio in that space today.
A lot of old time truckers would say nothing less than 350 or 375 or something like that for those regional haul where you're getting into a lot of those start and stop, multiple deliveries and so forth. Yeah. Maintenance and uptime. I'm just shocked sometimes at these like components now that are maintenance free, don't touch them for life. Or even like oil change intervals or lube intervals that are just like crazy long, like half the length of the, like crazy long. What's enabling all that, Tom, and where are you guys at on you think on taking advantage of those sort of opportunities?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked it. Yeah, it's no secret that fleets want longer component life, but they also want to minimize the maintenance touch points they have on the truck. You just look at the ever extending engine oil drop intervals that we're seeing in the market today. Fleets want to operate their equipment with as little maintenance demand as the technology will allow, right? So, they don't want to underserve the truck, they don't want to under maintain it, but they definitely don't want to over maintain it, right? So, I think about our axle solutions. We partner pretty closely with BASF; they're our lube partner. So we've gone to kind of an industry standard 500,000 mile extended drain interval on our drive axles. And what's interesting is we're doing that with ever increasing blends for efficiency. So today, a pretty common rear axle lube is the XFE 75W85 synthetic lube, which is approved up to that 500,000 mile drain interval. So you get great fuel economy, but you still get that best in class maintenance interval. But we're working with BASF right now on field testing for kind of the next evolution. So we're testing XFE 75 to 80, which will also still have the 500,000 mile drain interval. But this new lube, it'll give up to a mile per gallon increased vehicle level fuel efficiency over the current 75-85. So it's a balancing act, right? Fleets want these efficiency gaining technologies, but they don't want to give up the maintenance that they're maintenance intervals that we've been offering now for quite a few years.
We've done enough work on oils to be dangerous. Some of that's like you gotta almost of course you do field testing and you do bench testing in axles and so forth, but a lot of times it's just wait a minute, this oil I've been using works and I don't need to go to something new, and it's comfortable and proven, and it's one of those like technology things that can be really hard to convince someone to move into. Particularly, the advantage of these oils is they can, different blends can operate in the same axle. So that's good that it encourages the new option or the new feature, but it also allows for laggards to keep the old, right? As long as, I mean, at some point you're going to say that old oil doesn't work or lubrication doesn't work in the new one, but it's kind of tough for a while there. But and then pricing, I mean, are these given the fuel economy savings and the extended life, then that pays for generally a premium in cost? Is that, I kind of have that right?
It really depends on the OEM and what they're offering, right? So there are some
Mm,
OEMs that will only offer one base oil for like an on-highway application. But there are others that will offer multiple, factory fill lube options. So they will have, an XFE, high efficiency lube available in production. They do charge some premium for it, but it's not crazy from a factory fill perspective. Now, if you were to, do this at, maintenance interval, that there is a pretty good premium for, an XFE 7585 over, just a straight mineral base. But if you're, looking at the straight mineral base rather than, synthetic, although you're going to have lower upfront costs for the lube, you're also going to be limited then to, 100,000 mile or
right.
200,000 mile
Sure.
trainer, depending on the model axle or
Yeah,
application.
yeah, yeah. Given that we've got a growingly diverse audience, many of which might be listening to this, what's sort of some of your like sage advice? I mean, how do we handle the complexities of the commercial vehicle market along with some of these technologies coming, and just like how do we stay calm and smart during these times? Any advice for all of us?
Yeah, one of the things that I would encourage, especially people that are new to the industry or new to the space, is I mean, this is still very much a relationship business, right?
Mm,
And you can solve a lot by working your network, having building connections, maintaining connections. As fleets have ever more opportunity for new technologies and new widgets on vehicles. At the end of the day, trucks are still going to have major components, driveline components. I'd encourage fleets and especially people that are new to this space to reach out to understand what's on their trucks aside from just what's in the cab, what's under the truck, and make sure you know those component vendors. Make sure you have that relationship. There's going to come a time where you're going to have a question or need some support or need some help, and having those relationships and having that network will pay dividends off in the future.
So, Tom, it's been a pleasure having you.
Mike, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Rosen Friends.